Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, as always, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm here with a return guest, Dr. Alberto Acerbi. He is Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Trento in Italy, and he is the author of a new book, Technopanico. I mean, in English, it would be something like Technopanic, Digital Media Between Reasonable Caution and Unjustified Fears, and we're going to talk about the book today. So, Dr. Acerbi, welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure to everyone.
Thank you. Big pleasure for me. Hi, Ricardo.
So, let me start with this question. What do you mean by techno-panic by I'm using the word in English here, of course. I mean, how would you characterize a techno-panic?
Yes, Technopanic is a word that has been used a bit in some literature recently to talk about some excessive fear or alarmistic narrative about technologies, and in the case of the book is specific about communication technologies, and in particular about contemporary communication technologies, so digital media, social media, smartphone. We know that there has been a big attention about the effect of social media, smartphone on society and on us. And for some people, including myself, sometimes there has been a kind of overly negative and alarmistic narrative about the effect of digital technologies, while the image that came out from research is at least more nuanced. And so that the term Technopanics is exactly about this, about the fact that this overly alarmistic and negative narrative about digital technologies. Then, of course, there is an history behind this term. For example, and I talk about this in the first chapter of the book, in sociology, there is this idea of moral panics, which are indeed the society reacting for a series of reasons that then I explore, and we can talk about it a little bit more in the detail if you want. But again, the idea is negative and not necessarily always empirically grounded reaction to new technologies.
So in our previous conversation, we talked about cultural evolution. I mean, does this book and the way you approach this sort of panics connect in any way to your work in cultural evolution?
Yes, I would say so. It connects, I think, in two ways. One is, I would say, more like personal way, in the sense, so I start to work about the effect of digital media using this cultural evolution perspective you're talking about around 10 years ago, or even more now. And just after I started to work on this, so let's say in 2016, there was the first Trump election. Then there was Brexit, then you had all the increase of populist parties in Europe and everywhere. And in this time, there has also started to be a big backslash against social media. We then started, the idea of fake news and misinformation started basically to be very popular in 2016 with Trump election. There was Cambridge Analytica. So while I was working for my research interest related to cultural evolution to this topic, I could see that was emerging also all this interest. And as I was saying before, my impression was from the beginning that this was not really reflecting what we would know about the effect of social media. And so I started to be interested not only in my let's say basic research about digital media and cultural evolution, but also I started to try to understand the reason behind this narrative, why this narrative was there, what were the effects of this narrative. So there is this link that is more personal, but also I think there is a more theoretical and possibly more interesting link, because I think that if we have an evolutionary perspective, a cultural evolutionary perspective, we have also a view about how propaganda works, about social influence work, and I also talk about that, especially in the second chapter of the book. And this view has been, of course, influenced by other people that you interview, like Hugo Mercier or other epistemic vigilance. And the basic idea is that we are not overly gullible, but we tend to be pretty stubborn, that propaganda doesn't work in this automatic way that sometimes is kind of implicitly assumed when people talk about the danger of social media and so on. And so this is a more theoretical reason why I think that the background in evolutionary social science is important when we look to these phenomena.
Yes, we're going to talk a little bit later about how influenceable are people really, I mean, how gullible they are really. But before that, let's just talk a little bit more about moral panic. So which would you say are the aspects of our psychology that explain the development of moral panics?
Yes, there are several. I think that the clearest one are a general negative bias. So this is one of the few results in psychology that are quite robust. That we can say now, okay, this exists. Of course, there is a lot of variations and contextual factor, but we kind of know that in general there is a tendency for everybody, again, with individual difference and everything, but there is a tendency to find negative information more attention-catching, more memorable, more cognitively attractive than positive information. This, again, is really nothing new. We know that negative news are more successful than positive news, but is I think, part of the background of this, so it's kind of easy to say, oh, that the smartphone is destroying a generation, the social media are destroying democracy. This is something that travels very well, especially on social media, paradoxically. And so this is one. There is a second aspect that is also, I think, important, which is some sort of, we think that the past was better. This is also pretty obvious, but it can also be tested with the experiment. This is interesting. I mentioned some of the experiments that try to test this effect, but also a feature of these Technopanics, if you want, that we found also today with social media, smartphone, is like the past was better. Like the idea of post-truth era, which was very common, related exactly to social media in the last 10 years or so, it presupposes explicitly that there has been an era of truth. If we are in a post-truth era, there should have been something before in which things were better, and this again, it's an idea of a kind of mythical past, which is pretty difficult to defend if we think about it rationally. Jonathan Haidt, which is one of the most vocal character in showing the possible danger and risk of smartphone and social media usage, especially for teenagers and young people, is also often talking about the importance of free games, like having the kids going in the countryside, in the parks, which again, it's in a way it's kind of reasonable. The interesting point here is that a feature of this Technopanics is to have a reference to an era in the past in which things were better. And then, of course, so these are kind of psychological background of this idea. But then you have also a series of features of this moral panic or technopanics. So I used in the book, as I was saying before, the concept of moral panics. That is a more sociological concept. This is from a sociologist, he's called Stanley Cohen, of a few decades ago, and so he was studying the reaction of media and of the general population about some youth disorder that were happening in the UK in the early 60s, and he was the first one, let's say, well, he was lucky to invent the term moral panic, but also was the first one to really focus on the fact that these disorders were not really major, didn't create major problems, but still the reaction of the media and of the population was clearly bigger than what was the problem. And he started to try to understand what were the reasons related to this. So, for example, the way to easily find some scapegoat about some more complex societal problem, finding some generalized what are maybe local problem to like all the world problems. So maybe social media usage is problematic for someone, but we say social media is destroying a generation. So this you make bigger the problem. So there are a series of features that are then characterizing this panic. For the psychological reason, I was saying, you have this negativity, you have this nostalgia for the past, and they kind of go all together to create a very attractive story.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because there are two aspects here that are not new at all. I mean, first of all, people claiming that the younger generation or generations have some sort of problem, that they are decadent or they are degenerates, or because the new practices they have or the new technologies they use, their moral character is weaker, or and also moral panic surrounding new technology. Like, I mean, I've heard about moral panics regarding writing, romance novels, the radio, the TV, video games. So, I mean, this seems to be just part of a very old historic trend among people, right?
Yes, absolutely. So, again, I go through some of these moral panics related to communication technology, because this is the topic. And as you say, we have like from the writing itself to the radio, TV, video game. So there is a kind of a recurrent pattern that we can see. There are some good reason in a way. I would say good in a sense of we can understand why this happens. So I talked about the psychological reason, but it's also a fact that these new technologies, new communication technologies have strong impacts on our society. So it's normal in a way that we can be worried about that. I will give you just the example. For example, the printing press. That's, seems today a technology that we would say, okay, books are not that dangerous, but of course they are. Books are very dangerous, and when the printing press appeared, it's reasonable that people were worried, and is nice because I did I mean, it's not my main topic, but I did a bit of research about, the reaction on the printing press. And when you read these things, seems to read like it could have been written 10 years ago. People are worried about spread of misinformation, who is checking if what is written in these books is true or not. And it's quite interesting because it's true. The printing press was a disruptive technology that could potentially have negative effect. What I think that we need to learn from history in this case is that the introduction of new technologies, any kind of technologies, is in general, I say in the book, a process of adaptation, co-adaptation. So in general, people that tend to fear very strongly this new technology think that the technology arrived, it changes everything. We are society is kind of passive and is molded by the new technology, but this is not usually what happens. For example, in the case of the printing press, there are innovations that follow the printing press to manage, for example, the fact that there are many new books. People invented the index at the end of the book, so it's a way, when you have a lot of information, you need to find a way to organize this information. So this is a adaptation to the increasing of information. Again, it's a bit niche, but there are some interesting stuff about how annotating books changed from before and after the invention of the printing press. So even before, with manuscripts were annotated by readers or monks or whatever, but after, when you start to have a big circulation of books, the way you annotate books, it changed because it became a way to summarize and synthesize information. So it's always a process, and I think that even now something like this is happening, and it will happen. And I think this is, so let's say that the lection from the past technologies is not too much to say it already happened. So, I mean, it could be different now, but I think that the important lesson is that we need to remember how things change, and that is not just a deterministic introduction of the new technologies, but is a process of adaptation between society and technology.
So I would like to get into the topic or the specific panic surrounding online misinformation, but just before that, let me ask you more broadly. I mean, people have this very common idea, or at least people who deal with or talk about online misinformation have this very common idea that people are extremely gullible, and whatever kind of information they are exposed to, whatever they read, they watch, they listen to, they will fall for it. But I mean, how influenceable or how gullible are people really?
Yes, that's a $1 million question, as they say. The short answer is, I think, less than what we tend to think. I try to give a bit longer answer. Well, first, one interesting thing that is related to this is that, which is kind of curious, we tend to think that other people are gullible, not much ourselves. So we actually did a study about this with Sasha Chai. So we wanted to understand what kind of beliefs were linked to this idea that misinformation is very dangerous and is very widespread. So we had our participants to answer to this question about misinformation, and also about a series of other questions about, if they were worried about the status of the world, if they were thinking that they were not really good at detecting misinformation, if they were thinking that others were not really good, a series of questions. And what we found was that the most consistent correlation, because it's a correlational study, but the most consistent belief that was correlated with thinking that misinformation was a big problem was exactly the idea that other people were gullible, basically. It's called in psychology, it's called sometimes third person effect. The idea is that the other people are really socially influenceable, but we are not. So that's a kind of another pretty consistent pattern, like I was saying about the negativity bias. So it's something that seems to be pretty robust in different studies. And I think say something about the fact that our intuitive ideas about social influence are not super good. So we tend to think that others are, we not too much. And then going more on the science about that, as I was saying before, I'm coming from cultural evolution. In classic cultural evolution, there is this idea of what are called social learning strategies or transmission biases. So the idea is that we do not copy at random, but we have some kind of general heuristic, like copy the majority, let's say, copy from prestigious people, copy certain content and not other. So this is a kind of a first level, so we are not just randomly influenced. But I think that one can go a bit further than that. So in the previous book, in Cultural Evolution in the Digital Age, I was actually trying to understand whether these heuristic, these strategies were possibly deleterious in online dynamics, because, if we copy prestigious people, we could just follow some influencer or some politician. But I was saying that this didn't seem to be the case. And in this past year, I tried to go on in this direction. And for example, we found that in general, not only people do not use much these strategies, but also in the cultural evolution literature, we found that people do not copy others even when they should. So we did a sort of reviews of experiment in which people could use social learning or individual learning. And what we found is that people are just, at least in this experiment made by researchers in cultural evolution, that were testing the optimal social learning usage, but participants were not doing it. So people in the experiments tended to be stubborn instead of being too gullible. And then when you start to look in various literature, you find that this is a bit of a pattern. So there are studies about the fact that advertisements do not work that much. So if you put together the effect of advertisements, some work very well, and usually people remember the effective advertisement. Some do not, and so the effect tends to be zero. Studies about in sociology about the fact that people tend to basically not change too much their idea during their life course. They say about the stable disposition model, so that people do not change too much. And so these provide a different picture of social influence. And then again, my research, I arrived to this idea, as I was saying before. I was mentioning the work of Hugo Mercier or the people in Paris about epistemic vigilance, which is, again, is an evolutionary approach to social influence, but is a bit more, let's say, strict than what would be standard cultural evolution. Now, I don't enter in the detail of this approach. I'm sure that you already talked with them, and so you would.
I've had Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber on the show.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. And I think, to me, at the moment, this seems to be the theoretical framework that, at least in my ideas, seem to describe, to explain better what we see in reality, and which, of course, doesn't mean that we do not change our mind, but it means that the way we change our mind is not by seeing few fake news or because of political propaganda, but we need to take into account much many factors and so on. And so, let's say, going to the topic, the Technopanic topic, with this background, let's say, okay, we are not that gullible. Changing our mind is not that easy. It gives you some perspective to look at all the aspects, right? From micro-targeting to misinformation to the effect on mental health. They say, okay, but maybe they're not so direct and so clear as they are sometimes presented in the narrative.
So, but let me ask you then, what do we know about the availability of online disinformation? Because again, people who write on this topic, I mean, not everyone, of course, but many people, popular writers who write on this topic tend to present it as a moral panic, in the sense that, online disinformation is everywhere and it influences a lot of people and it spreads very easily. I mean, what do we know about that? Is it really the case that there's lots of disinformation on the internet and that it spreads very easily? Like, for example, even just during the last pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, at a certain point, some people were panicking because apparently they thought that many people suddenly were anti-vaxxers. I mean, is that really the case or not?
Yeah. That's excellent. No, it's not. So and again, it's strange because it was kind of surprising for me when I started to study these things. As I was saying before, say 2016, when everybody was talking about social media full of misinformation, internet is full of misinformation. The few studies that started to appear, they were saying, okay, that's not the case. I mean, the majority, of course, the point is that obviously if you go online, you can find all the misinformation that you want. I can just now Google for Bill Gates, whatever was doing with the vaccine or whatever.
The chips on the vaccine.
The chips, yeah. Exactly. I would find thousands or millions of pages and various versions. So obviously it's there. The point is that we need to, if we want to assess the quantity of misinformation, we need to assess it in the context of the total quantity of information. So this would be the numerator of a fraction in which the denominator is all the information that we can find online. When we look at it in this way, then it's always like few percentage points. Of course, it depends. There are many ways to measure it. It's an open problem, and still the results, I think, now give a story that I think everybody would agree that if we look at the quantity of misinformation is always very, very limited, also because the majority of people tend to look at mainstream things that usually do not have a big incentive to share misinformation. It's also generally like the people that are a lot online, they will also consume and share more misinformation, but they will consume and share more of everything. So that's again a problem of you have to put this in a relation between the total activity or the total quantity of information. So this is about the quantity. We don't have any strong support of the idea that misinformation is more effective to spread than true information. In fact, it's intuitive to think that true information is more likely to spread than false information, and in this case the intuition is probably correct. So there's nothing really. I mean, I discussed a famous paper that was proposing this idea, but I think it's not with that strong support for that. The main point, though, is the idea that one could say, okay, even if there is not much misinformation, could have some strong effect on people. It could, but the point is that nobody really knows, and so the people that claim this are just assuming that this is the case. It's obviously very difficult to measure the effect. So what I'm saying here is just that we don't know, and then if we have a perspective like the one I have, so about an evolutionary perspective, the safe assumption is to say that probably there is not much effect. What is worrying is that still now people tend to conflate consumption of misinformation and change of beliefs, of ideas. So people are exposed to misinformation. So you see, you are anti-vaccination because you saw some misinformation. To me, it's usually the causal chain doesn't go in this direction. So you are opposite to the vaccine for complicated reason that can be your related to your economical and social background, to your belief, into your trust in institution and in politics. So you're also skeptical about vaccines. So you see some our friend Bill Gates and the chip, and you just engage or share with this misinformation, not because you change your belief, not to have other changing belief because it will not work, but you're just signaling, hi, look at this, I'm against the government. So I think that would be a more plausible explanation of why some people would do this. So I really think that then we can talk more about the more deeper ethical problem about the fight against the misinformation. But for staying on the empirical part, I think there has been a lot of not really robust fear about misinformation and about the effect, about the quantity, about the change in people's mind that is really not very robust from the empirical point of view.
But do you think there are any aspects of disinformation we should worry about? And do you think that we should do something to fight it? And if so, how?
Okay, that's a complicated question. I of course, some aspects of misinformation are not so. Like let's use again the example of the vaccine misinformation. So this is we don't want it. So the point is that as I would put the thing, what we don't want is people to be against the vaccine. This we agree that we don't want. We want that people would again. Let's keep aside all the debates about the vaccine. Just say, okay, vaccinate is good. We agree on that. We do want that people do it, and we have to fight for this. But I don't think we have to fight for this. We cannot just fight against the misinformation on the vaccine. We have to make these people not receptive to this misinformation, and this misinformation will disappear. So I think that what we have to fight for is more the demand for misinformation than the production. Because if we can do all the fight of misinformation that we want and try to avoid this, but if the demand will be there, somehow the demand will be satisfied in somewhere in social media or in internet. So we used to say that misinformation is more a symptom than a cause of something. So yes, we want to fight something that appears as misinformation, but the way to fight it is not to fight misinformation, but is to fight the reason why people would be sensitive or willing to accept this misinformation. So I think that's and I think really this is a key point, because think let's leave on the side the vaccine case, but like people focused in the first Trump election to say, okay, Trump was elected with the fake news that they were called at the moment, so we have to fight misinformation, and we're still there. So maybe we had to find something else, and so. Yeah, I think we need to be careful to this is an easy way to you have something that you don't like and you identify, and this is another big feature of Technopanics. So we don't like Trump, let's say, and so we say, okay, it's easy to identify the problem in the misinformation, is made easy to fight it, but if we are not identifying the real problem, the social, the cultural, the economic cause, we are a bit of wasting our time.
So a topic that is somewhat related to misinformation, but is not exactly the same, at least psychologically. Let's talk a little bit about conspiracy theories. So how do conspiracy theories come about? I mean, what aspects of our psychology explain them, and are conspiracy theories necessarily irrational?
Yes, that's another interesting point. So there has been also in this case, I think, a sort of panics about the relationship between social media and conspiracy theories, this idea that the world is full of conspiracies now. This also, I think, is the same feature of what we already said about misinformation. So not strong empirical support, at least dubious empirical support, unclear causal link between believing in a conspiracy theory and changing behaviors and ideas. Conspiracy theories do exist. They existed for centuries or millennia. As you were saying, conspiracy theories, they exist, and they are up to a point relatively common because they do have some psychological function. For example, they have epistemic function, so they make us, the world is a very complicated place, and they are usually simpler way to understand events that are complicated. Let's use again the COVID example. It's very difficult to know what exactly happened, but if you say some whatever, produce it on purpose and throw it around, this explain, give you like an epistemic value. They have social value. So beside knowing and understanding, give also an explanation that make the complexity of events in a way that you can understand and say, okay, that's why this happened. So there are a lot of reasons. So it's not surprising that they are around. The question is there any special relationship within social media, or there has been an increase in the past year because of social media of beliefs in conspiracy theories? And again, this is not clear. So again, the post-truth era, it's a bit problematic. Conspiracy theories were there before. It's even more difficult here than measuring misinformation, like calculating the proportion of beliefs in conspiracy theories in 60 years ago. It's very complicated, but some people try to do the Joe Sinski and the group. And when you look at this again, it doesn't seem that there is a clear pattern in which they increase. Of course, social media are conspiracy theory spreads on social media because everything spreads on social media, so you will not be surprised about that. In the book, I discuss the fact that maybe this is a pretty speculative. I found it interesting, though, that one aspect of conspiracy theories is that people that believe the conspiracy theory can somehow participate in the construction of the theory. Here, a good example is QAnon, the story. I don't know if you remember I mean, now is a bit quieter, but there was this Q that was putting drops online that had to be interpreted by and I think this is an interesting case because in this case there is a link with social media. You could do this only on social media. 50 years ago would have been a problem for Q to have people to collaborate in this creation of the conspiracy, because how would you do it? You can do it in your cafe or something, but would have not been very effective. So in a way, I think social media makes this collaborative construction of conspiracy theories maybe easier, and so maybe they can change some features of the conspiracy theories. But that there has been an increase because of social media is not clear. Again, they are there. And I think if I can add, the logic to me is the same of misinformation. So we see them, and now we can again look for weird conspiracy theory online, and we see them. 50 years ago, we had to go and check with weird publications or with people. While now I call it availability. So everything is there, everything can be measured and counted, and so it appears that the world is very weird, but maybe it was weird or weirder even before. We just didn't know because we were in our we didn't have the access to this information.
So let me ask you about another very common claim that people make, that online and particularly on social media, we live in echo chambers and there's filter bubbles. And so basically what people are saying is that the sort of information diet we get online is very biased and tailored to our own beliefs, our own political beliefs and other kinds of beliefs. And so we don't really get exposed to contrary views. We don't really get exposed to information that contradicts or that would tell us something different than what we already believe in. I mean, is that really the case?
Yeah, this has been another big fear related to social media. Again, there has been, social media start to be widespread, and you have Trump, and you have populist party, and you have Brexit. And so, as in the case of misinformation and conspiracy theories, it was natural to link the two things, social media and this increasing people believing things that we didn't like. We, in this case, I'm an academic liberal professor of sociology, so I'm like, oh wow. But even in this case, I think it's and I would say that now on this, it kind of the fashion of the echo chambers on the internet kind of went down, I think. And again, even in this case, the basic idea is plausible. So we know that the algorithm would give us, on average, similar things to what we already like. We can choose to follow someone and not follow some other. Availability also, this is very good, because if you look at the transmission of information in a social network, you would obviously find clusters that tend to communicate more within than with the external. And so this was another idea that was very popular, and I think, again, not very, very well grounded. And indeed, the more studies that happen, they show that the echo chamber in nature of social media is less echo chambery than what people would think. That when you compare, especially the situation in social media and not in social media, in say offline life, echo chambers and polarization are also present. So traditional media are as much, if not more, polarized than social media. Daily interaction are also very polarized. The group of friends that we have are not usually very, very different from political point of view. Even in Technopanic, in the book, I talk about also the example of like geographical polarization. Like people live in different neighbors without even thinking about social media. You just, there are neighbors for rich and leftist people and whatever. So I think the picture is much more complicated, and to me now this seems really like not the case. But there is I think a nice example is what happened now with the division blue sky and X. People had to create their own echo chambers because social media were too much mixing people. So you say, okay, no, I want to refound. So it's the opposite of the idea of it's probably social media that they were giving too much diversity. And so people had to say, okay, no, I don't want this diversity. I prefer which is, again, reasonable for many point of view, but it is really the opposite of what the echo chambers idea would predict. And another aspect here that I think is important is that this is really an example in which, and I think is a problem in general for studies of social media, is that they are generally US-centric. So in US, there has been clearly an increase in polarization in the last, actually it predates social media. The increase in polarization is in the last decades. And then, of course, you link these two things. The point is less clear that the same effort has been in other countries where, of course, you still had the diffusion of social media, but you didn't have the same increase in polarization. And so again, this is the same problem I was telling before about fake news. It's easy to say, okay, there is a problem, we don't like the increase in polarization, let's identify an easy target, echo chambers in social media, but sometimes this cannot be the right way to do it.
So another very common thing that we've heard even in recent years from very notable people like Tristan Harris and others, where they say that algorithms know us better than we know ourselves, and that we can, for example, predict someone's personality based on what they do on social media. And if, for example, you go on Netflix or on Amazon or on YouTube, they always know you better than yourself, and they always suggest content for you to watch that before you know you want to watch it, something along those lines. Is that really true?
Well, it is a bit true. Of course, there is a lot of data that can be collected on our activities, and of course they tell something about us and about our inclinations, and our behavior can be up to a point predictable if we use our activities. So on this, I'm saying, okay, yeah, we have to be careful about this what we are doing online, about how our data who can have access to our data. So I think this is true. The point for me is, what are the consequences of this? So if we go from this to the fact that some magic algorithm can change our political ideas or our behaviors, then it's a problem. The problem is there. So something can be predicted. Up to a point, I think this is okay. So it's good if we have some personalization, for example, if Amazon advise me some new books to buy. The catalog of Amazon or the amount of things that are online would be and algorithms should somehow do something, otherwise we cannot have a random search in this big search space. It's just an impossible problem. I have to say, this is, I'm talking as a normal guy. My feeling is that they are not that effective. I think the personalization algorithm should be more effective. I think in the book I do this example. When we moved in Trento, I bought a mattress for the bed from IKEA. Yeah. And then I had for weeks like advertisement of mattress of the bed. So it's not that I'm opening a hotel or something. I bought my mattress. So it's like a not super smart algorithm should have this. Or you buy, you know, some Chinese food and then always you have it. I don't know, it seems pretty nothing for, I never felt to be so like scared about this, the power of the algorithm. Say so, it's true to, as I was saying before, that there is some predictive power. There have been studies that I think about quite reasonable that, you know, can predict, for example, the up to a point your personality traits based on your social media activity, which is reasonable, and it's something that is quite interesting. As I was saying, what can you do with that? Even in this case, again, there is the alarmistic narrative that, you know, Cambridge Analytica with the psychographic, I think was the term, psychographic, was like, you know, taking the data, then having people change their vote, that Brexit was due to in part, at least, to the activity of Cambridge Analytica. Again, I repeat the same story. When we look at the studies that try to look on the for example, the persuasive effect of micro-targeting. How do you say in English? Micro-targeting or micro-targeting?
I usually say micro-targeting, but I mean, maybe there are people who say micro-targeting. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I live in Italy now. I'm forgetting my English. Let's say micro-targeting. What studies that look at the effect of micro-targeting, political micro-targeting, usually, as I mean, I have the same pattern, but they don't find strong effect. The effect seems very small and very context dependent. Of course, there are studies that show that if I have some information of your personality and I put like an advertisement related to the personality, maybe you click a bit more on this than on the other, that is the opposite. But going from there to the effect of political micro-targeting is really, again, I'm not saying in this case that we know that it doesn't work. I'm saying that we don't know whether it works. And this is very different with the narrative that we have about the power of the algorithms that are changing our idea. And the same logic, I think, again, when you look at this, then you are not looking at a more real problem. So like the Cambridge Analytica scandals, if you think that changed the result of Brexit and the power of psychographic advertisement, but then, okay, maybe let's look at why Brexit happened, or let's look about why the usage of data in Cambridge Analytica, what was the problem, what was okay, what was not. If we say they are destroying the world, we are not really even criticizing well these big corporations. So again, my more nuanced view is not to say everything is good and they are doing good. I think that is not effective to have this catastrophistic and overly negative narrative.
So another very common claim, and because I mean, I spent some time on YouTube also because of my work, I've heard over the past few years many people talking about rabbit holes and that people can fall into rabbit holes on social media and YouTube particularly. And there are even videos of people on YouTube talking about how they fell into a alt-right rabbit hole, for example. I mean, is that really something supported by the evidence that something like that can happen on social media?
Again, that's the same. So this is a relatively plausible story. You know, you have people spend a lot of time on YouTube. YouTube advise you other videos, and maybe videos that are more emotionally strong.
Compelling. Yeah.
Sorry?
Emotionally compelling.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
can be advised more by the algorithms. There is an increase in again the alt-right or whatever for young people. So that's a very good story. It's plausible. It's very make us feel well, because you say, okay, these are good guys. Society is good, but YouTube is making them going in this direction. Again, in this case, there is about. I mean, usually when you read about these rabbit holes, is generally, you know, single stories of some people that tells a story about this. Which, I mean, I don't have doubt that these stories are real and honest. The point is, when we try to study this with experiments or with data, it's also very, very unclear if there is an effect. In the book, I talk about an experiment they did with what they call counterfactual bots. So they had some bots being trained on the because what is difficult in this case is to distinguish the effect of personal usage, personal choices, and the algorithms. Of course, people that go towards alt-right will look at more alt-right video, but it's because they want to, or it's because the algorithm that push them. That's another very difficult question. This experiment, they have these counterfactual bots. They were trained on the viewing history of real individuals. And then at some point, the bots were just following blindly, because it's a bot, the algorithmic recommendation, and the users will keep on doing their own stuff. And so you can, in this case, you can compare the pure algorithmic recommendation and not the pure user, but user plus algorithmic. If the pure algorithmic, if the rabbit hole theory is correct, the pure algorithmic recommendation should push you more toward the extreme. And again, in this study, they found the opposite. So they found that the algorithmic recommendation tend to stay where they were, or even go toward more moderate videos, while users were going in their whatever direction, in some case, toward more extreme view. And this makes sense because the algorithms usually give you, okay, emotionally compelling content, but also generally give you content that is already popular. And content that is already popular is mainstream video. And again, of course, it happens that sometime you have, you know, the Andrew Tate or whatever that get very big. But I think it's interesting because when it happens, everybody talk about it. So it's not what happens in YouTube, what happened in social media. Is sometimes this happens, and so we are like all worried. But when we look at the general pattern, this is not the case. And even in this case, to understand why some young people go toward the alt-right or whatever they go, the rabbit hole hypothesis is to me a bit of a shortcut and a scapegoat to say, okay, we just if the algorithm would be different, everybody would be happy, which is a strange way to put things for me.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you now about the correlation or even the causation some people have been making between social media use and mental health outcomes. I mean, even last year, we've had a new book come out by Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. I mean, it really didn't convince me at all. And I read some critiques of it, and it seems that many of the claims he makes there are not really well supported by the evidence, and there were some poor studies cited there. But I mean, let's go step by step here. First of all, How can social media use and its supposed effect on mental health be properly measured?
That's a difficult question. How can we properly measure? We don't know. What we know is that a lot of people, including me and some of my colleagues and other people, are trying to do this. And I think if we are honest, we should say that it's very difficult, and that so far, even in this case, there is not a clear results that go in any direction. So I mean, on this, I am quite open to see what happened. I'm happy to, if we will meet in an interview in other 5 years, I'm happy to say, okay, I want to see other 5 years on research, and I may change my mind. On this, I'm pretty happy to say. In the other, I think I would bet all my money. On this, I'm like, let's see what happens. But we can say what is happening now, and the situation didn't change from when I finished the book 1 year ago or so, is that we don't have clear, the first problem is the existence and the strength of the correlation between social media usage or smartphone usage and mental health. So some studies found a correlation, some didn't. There are several problems. One is that usually these correlations are very, very small, which by itself is okay. Human behavior and societies are complicated stuff, so small effects are perfectly fine. The problem is that these small effects are also linked to the fact that, as you were saying, it's very difficult to measure both social media usage or smartphone usage or digital technology usage and mental health. So you can ask people how many social media do they have in an account, how many hours they spend on social media, how many hours they spend on the smartphone, do they have a smartphone or not? There are many. Mental health is the same. You can ask them, you can look at medical prescription. And the problem is that when you put this thing together, you can find always something. So we need to be very, very careful. To me, it seems that yes, it's plausible that there is some small negative correlation, but even if there is a big discrepancy between this very small effect, if there is, and like the destroying a generation thing. And this is just the first aspect. This is the aspect about the correlation. Then the second aspect is about the causality. Yeah. So what is, I mean, it's equally plausible that people that for any reason have worse mental health would use more smartphones and social media than the opposite, that is the usage of social media or smartphone to cause mental health. And even in this case, again, I'm not saying that I am sure that it's not the case. I'm sure that people that say that they are sure, they are a bit cheating, I think, because it's really difficult to do experiments that test properly this causation. Because it's very difficult. So you have this, for example, this deactivation experiment. So you ask to a person to say not use a smartphone or a social media for a certain period of time, and then you measure the difference. So these are kind of like standard experiments. So you have a control group, you can do your stats, everything. But of course, with how common is this conversation in society? If someone asks me to not use my phone for a week, I kind of have very strong expectation of how I would feel, and what I would say is very difficult to see if these data are very reliable, and then it's just 1 week. What does it mean to not have it or have it? I mean, just 1 week or 1 month or 1 day can be a little holiday from the social media. It's just complicated, and again, it's also, I mean, in a situation in which everybody use social media or smartphone, it's very difficult to measure if there is maybe. And now I'm saying something against my point. So like maybe even if a person use it not too much, if everybody around them use it, they will also have a negative effect. So you cannot measure. So what I'm saying is that to me the best guess that we can have is that we don't know now. So it's good to have up to a point some be careful about that, but we don't want to go on the extreme and present this thing as that we know and that we need to have strong reaction to this, because, and I'm repeating myself, this could also have by itself a negative effect. We don't know what would happen if we take out. I'm almost interested. So in Australia there will be a ban for less than 16-year-old of social media, starting I think in the 10th of December. You know, can be maybe we will know more. I'm happy to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, but there are two other points here that I think could be a little bit problematic. I mean, one of them has to do even with the claim that teen mental health is getting worse over time, because I've heard and read people questioning that claim, and they look at the data and say that there's not really good enough evidence to really make the claim or be sure that teen mental health is getting worse over time or over the past 15 years or so, because usually people start in 2010 with the introduction of smartphones and the widespread social media and so on. And then even if it's getting worse, I think that, and please tell me if you agree with this point or not, but I think that trying to create this unifactorial narrative based just on social media use is not helpful, because there are many other factors that could be playing a role here, like, for example, an uncertain future for young people having to do with, for example, climate change, the job market, the economy, and so on. I mean, there are many other aspects that could be playing a role here if mental health is getting worse, right?
Yes, but it's much easier to say that it's the smartphone. You know, it's more difficult to solve the job market and climate change. While the smartphone, we can say just, okay, don't use the smartphone until you are 16 and you feel good about that. No, excellent point. I completely agree. So first thing, is really true that there is this decline in mental health. Again, one aspect is that usually, as you were saying, people take the last 20 years of data and they observe something like this. Even in US, if you take, say, the last 40 or 50 years, you have kind of some ups and downs. And if you look at all the data, there's nothing special in these last 20 years. People were, for example, much worse in the early 90s. I don't know. I remember, now I don't remember the exact data, but if you look, there's nothing special now. So this is also not clear. And again, as I was saying before, this is all about US data. It's less clear if this happens in other country. Seem kind of in UK, for example, is less in Italy or in more South European country. So it's not obvious this. And the second aspect that you were saying, which I completely agree, is this, as you were saying, this monocausal explanation. Of course, there are so many possible other reasons. I mean, all that you say, the fact that there has been in some country, and these are the countries in which you observe more clearly this effect, a change also in the social fabric of the societies, and which I think it's more problematic and interesting also than just the smartphone. That there has been the way in which mental health is categorized change also a lot. So it's now, which is good, but it can have some effect. Now it's kind of more okay to say that you have some problem than maybe 20 years ago. Again, that's good, but could create these efforts. So also this part is not foolproof. So we need to be careful when we do big claims. But again, these big claims tend to be very attractive for the reason I was saying before. They are negative. They talk about when I was young, we didn't use the smartphone. They find easy solution to problems that are complex and are scary. So yeah, they travel fast in culture.
Is there good enough evidence to support the existence of something like smartphone or social media addiction? Because I mean, I've heard people talking about that, and then something that really particularly irritates me is that people always link it to dopamine, and then there's always influencers on social media and the internet talking about dopamine addiction, or that every time you use your smartphone or you go on social media, you get a dopamine hit. I mean, is there really any basis, any scientific basis to that?
No, not really. I mean, this, again, but I completely agree with you. So it's fun because yes, you have addicted by dopamine or whatever. So yeah, this is. I mean, you know, dopamine is. I work in cultural evolution, so I don't want to enter in the detail. But dopamine is a neurotransmitter, so you cannot be addicted of a neurotransmitter. It's just something that, you know, the level change whenever you do something that is pleasurable or not. So this is the first point. When someone say, okay, I'm addicted to dopamine or whatever, it's just say, okay, let's not read the rest of the article. Then, of course, the fact that we use smartphone and social media means that they give us some form of reward, otherwise we would not use them. So that probably is true. Again, I don't know really here the detail, but of course there will be some increase in dopamine when we do something on social media. The point is that to talk about addiction or about problematic behavior, this increase in dopamine should be, for example, similar to what is the increase that you have for activities for which we use usually the term of addiction, drugs or similar thing. And when you look at this in this way, it's completely another thing. I mean, in general, I think in general it's problematic to move the terminology of addiction to behavioral addiction. I mean, people do it. Obviously, the proper domain of the term addiction is about drugs or alcohol, things that have some withdrawal, physical effect. This you can use addiction, that's a problem. When you talk about behavioral addiction, my opinion is that it makes sense if the behavior gets problematic for everyone that go after a certain threshold. So let me explain. Let's leave aside any physical effect or whatever, but we can say that heroin is addictive because if you start to use heroin and if you go on for a while, for the, I don't know, I'm using just a random number, for the 90% of people, this will create problems. So it's generally problematic. So sometime for behavioral addiction, this could make sense. I'm thinking about like betting in a very consistent way. I would think that if a person bet money every day for a long period of time, this would necessarily, at least for a big percentage of people, a problematic behavior. So I would call it, I don't know, again, I'm not an expert, but I would accept that, okay, we can talk, we can use the language of addition, this adds something to our knowledge of the behavior. Going to the social media, I think that this is not the case. The majority of people have an okay usage of social media. Of course, there is problematic. This doesn't mean that there is not problematic use. There is. Some people use, maybe they need, like, you know, real medical or psychological help, that's for sure, but it's not that the majority of people that start to use social media end up in a problematic situation. So in this case, I would not talk about addiction. That's why when people use the term addiction, you know, like sex addiction or shopping addiction, I think these are kind of you know, label for saying something in a funny way that maybe describe the behavior of some people, but the problem is not social media addiction. The problem is that these people that are addicted to social media or shopping, whatever, have some other problem. But while in the case of heroin and maybe betting, these are problematic by itself. In this case, they are not. So I will not use the term addiction, and I think this also is a bit of polluting the conversation about the effect of social media, because, you know.
What do you make of proposals that we've seen across the world for banning smartphones from schools and prohibiting social media use for children under 16? I mean, do you think that there's any scientific evidence to support policies and measures like that?
Yeah, as I was saying before, the scientific evidence is really not there yet. And I was saying, okay, let's hope that, you know, if this thing happens, even if I'm not particularly in support of this, maybe we will have some scientific evidence. And, you know, I hope in 5 years to talk about this, and I will answer to this question. And I'm really happy in this case to change my mind. With the evidence that we have now about the effect, I think like 16 years old bans can be more risky than beneficial. Of course, I'm not claiming that we need to give, you know, smartphone to primary school children and let them abandon and do things. I don't think that the way is banning. I think the way should be a society that accept in full what can be the effect, the positive and the negative effect of smartphone and social media usage, and build structures in society, in school, in family, that make the usage of social media take the positive part and not the negative part. Again, because a ban can actually, for some teenager, I imagine that social media usage is really important. Imagine, you know, marginalized communities, or it could be more problematic for them than beneficial for the rest of the people, and then you would do really damage to someone with a ban. So I'm not particularly in favor. As I'm saying, we don't know too much, so to me it would be, I mean, I would, you know, I would prefer that the usage of smartphone is incremental with age, that should not start too early, but this should be done, I think, in a different way. Should be done in a society that give you occasions to, you know, do something else without prohibiting. So, you know, middle school kids should not use too much the smartphone, not because there is a law against that, but because they have other things to do, because adults, people should give the example of using it in a good and moderate way. Again, it's easy to say, yes, it's the kids that are the problem. So It's difficult. I'm mostly talking about what is a kind of a common sense thing, because we don't have much science behind that. But people that pretend that there is a science are, in general, I don't think, in very good faith. Well, they are probably in good faith from their point of view, but you cannot say that we have strong support for these initiatives.
Yes, and I've heard some arguments made by people who are against these kinds of bans that I think are really important to consider. At least it's not just some of the positive aspects of social media, like the ones you referred to there, and the fact that people can connect more easily with other people, and perhaps it's easier to get in touch with people from different cultural backgrounds and have those sorts of experiences, but also the fact that, and these are the arguments that some people make against the bans, the fact that it is important even for children to acquire and develop social media literacy, online literacy, and also for them, because like it or not, social media are now part of our lives, the lives of everyone. It's important for children also to learn how to use them properly, even in the future, for their future in terms of professional development and so on.
Yes, yeah, no, I agree definitely. I mean, it's at least unclear whether, they are banned until 16-year-old, and then a 16-year-old, what happened? They just, it could be even worse, because then they have, the full access, and they didn't have any experience to build some knowledge. Yeah, I completely agree. Another aspect that is more practical, would this work? I mean, in how many days the kids will find a way to fake the age identity? I mean, it seems to me like very, very. But okay, let's not talk about that. It's not. But it's a practical thing. But we see. But yeah, I agree completely. Yeah, it's probably makes sense to build incrementally skills in a positive and controlled environment, and say like, okay, this is bad, and you can do it only at 16.
Yeah, I mean, I was laughing because I was an adolescent in the 2000s when when the internet became more widespread, and I can guarantee you that as young people, we were able to find ways around certain things.
Exactly. We all have this experience. So yes.
Okay, so I have two more questions then.
Yeah.
What is your take then on communication technologies? I mean, are they mostly good, mostly bad? How should we deal with them?
Well, that's a hard question. We cannot say if they are mostly good or mostly bad. The classic thing is it depends how we use them. But also, there is also, I think, a naive thing that say, okay, they are neutral, and it depends what we do. Yeah. But I don't think they are neutral. I think that each communication technologies give some kind of affordances, give some kind of, and even different social media have different algorithms that you use them for different things. So you use LinkedIn to promote your work, and Facebook to show the last dinner that you did. Television was one too many media, visual. Radio was one too many, but without visual. Social media are one to one or many to many. So it's not that they are neutral. Each different communication media have different features. And I don't even think that one can say if they are good or bad. The point is, as I was saying probably at the beginning, each new communication media has communication technology. Each new media have different affordances, different features, and then there is a co-adaptation process of the society that tend to use this in a way that up to a point serves the society. So in general, new communication technologies give more possibility of communicate, and this thing is potentially at least positive. Then of course depends how we use the affordances, how the society adapt to this. To me, like now seems crazy to say that internet it was a positive development, but to me it clearly is. I mean, we give as for granted the fact that we are doing something that until 30 maybe years ago, 20 even was impossible. Now it's normal, and this is increasing the possibility. Like we take for granted a lot of innovation, a lot of possibilities that to me are positive. So it's not that technologies are positive or negative, and not even neutral. Technologies, I was saying, have affordances and open new spaces, and it's up to the society use them in the better ways. And my point is that whatever people would say, I think that the net balance of what happened with digital communication technologies is positive. We seem crazy. I mean, this was probably the dominant idea like 20 years ago or something, and I found recently a book of 20 years ago, that was 15 years ago, that was like internet will not solve all the problem, but it's not, which reading now seems like, of course, because they not solve the problem, but because we really change our perspective on the effort. But I think there are many things that we take for granted that are very important.
And so my last question then, and in part we've already explored this question, but I want to get, I guess, a broader or a more detailed answer from you. What do you think are the effects of alarmist narratives surrounding social media and communication technologies more generally? I mean, earlier when we talked about the supposed correlation between social media use and mental health outcomes, we mentioned the fact that these sort of monocausal explanations, I mean, are not good scientifically, but also they leave other possible factors aside that could be considered and tackled. So what other effects of these alarmist narratives do you think we can have?
Yeah, that's an excellent question to conclude. And I mean, it's also like a bit like the chapter of my book, this, because usually people kind of tell me, well, you are defending Elon Musk or Zuckerberg, which is, unfortunately, as you see, I'm here in my kitchen. I am not on some private jet.
Some mention.
Yeah, no, there's no mention. It's a little kitchen. Trento is very nice, but no. Okay, besides this, so yeah, the point is that I think that this negative alarmistic narrative can have negative effect by itself. So one could say, okay, well, they're not strong supported, but still we try to do better. The point is that I don't think that this is the case. So you already gave the example of mental health, but for example, let's go back at the misinformation case. So one aspect that we already discussed a bit before is that if you focus on this cause or presumed cause of various events, you are not really looking at more possibly important structural causes, social problem, economical problem, cultural problem. You just say, okay, people vote populist parties because of misinformation. That's a problem with this narrative. There are also other, for example, in the case of misinformation, more specific problem. One, I think that this narrative contributed in a general loss in trust media and institution. Even in this case, I would not say that this is the only cause. I would not go for the monocausal explanation, but I think it's one of the causes. If people keep on repeating, you know, social media is just a lot of misinformation, and then we observe that there are now some experiments that try to actually test these things. So if you tell to participants that that's everything, that the misinformation is very widespread, they will tend to trust less also reliable news. This is also a problem for what we said before. So we say that the problem with social influence is not too much that we are too gullible, but that we do not change our mind when we should. So if this negative narrative of misinformation make everybody more skeptical, this is probably not the right direction. We would like people to be open to reliable information, like people use less and less news. Social media, at least some of them, try to avoid to propose political news for the fear of being involved in some misinformation thing. And again, the result is that people are less informed. So in general, I think there is a lot of problems that are, so beside the fact that they are not empirically strongly supported, this narrative have some drawback by itself. And again, even if we want, as I want, even if we want to be critical about, say, social media, about some aspect, if we have this overall not robust narrative, we are not really looking at the specific aspect of the things that we could change. I steal you other 2 minutes for talking about something that I didn't talk in the book, because I didn't want artificial intelligence, because I said, okay, let's just not touch this because negative narrative, it's complicated. But I was finishing to work at the book, and was the time in which there were this big narrative about the existential AI risk for humanity, and that, you know, there will be AGI, and then people will, humanity will get extinct, and so you have in this case like a very big negative alarmistic narrative. And what I found interesting in a way, that it was supported a lot by the same people, like the big guy working in AI. And I was wondering, like, why? I mean, they don't have any interest in supporting this narrative. But then I was thinking about this, and I was saying, okay, but they do. Because if we are focusing about these, you know, things that maybe will not happen, or maybe they will in 50 years, we are not looking how they are getting the money, where are the data that they're using. So again, I think these big narratives are in a way paradoxically going in a good direction for the companies or the social media. So it's also this is a risk. I think it's much more productive to focus on a realistic thing and change what we can actually change.
Mm-hmm. So let's end on that note, Dr. Acerbi, and the book is again Tecnopanico. I will be leaving a link to it in the description below. And apart from the book, where can people find you and your work on the internet?
Yes, again, I try to do one Substack in Italian, which is because I was trying to focus a bit on the Italian audience. So there is this, it's called 5 link a settimana, which means 5 links every week, in which I try to put these links to this kind of topic we are talking about, and also some cultural evolution things. So this is, you know, something that can be interesting. Again, the idea here is also related to the fact that if you have access to all this information, curation is kind of important. So having someone that would give you, okay, just read these 5 things or the work that you do. So try to, you know, give some curated aspect. It's getting more and more important the more access do you have. And then I am in the usual social media.
Well, and as I told you yesterday, I mean, the day before we recorded the interview, I'm going to put up your book on my list of my favorite nonfiction books of 2025. And I mean, maybe I can influence a few people to learn Italian, because I will also have another Italian book on the list this year, so 2 Italian books. So I mean, maybe I might influence some people to learn another language.
that would be good. I mean, I translated it. I have a first draft of an English translation. Hopefully there will be an English version maybe next year, but let's see. People can start to learn Italian, and then
yeah, I think that's a good thing.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Dr. Acerbi, thank you very much for coming on the show again. It's been fascinating to talk with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you. Bye, everybody.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you liked it, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights, learning and development done differently. Check their website at enlights.com, and also please consider supporting the show on Patreon or PayPal. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters: Paure, LARSEN, Jerry Mullerens, Frederick Sunda, Bernardo Seixas, Olaf, Alex, Adam, KESSEL, Matthew Whittingbird, ARNAUD, WOLFF, Tim, HOLLOSY, HENRIK, AHLENIUS, John Connors, Philip Forrest Connolly, Dan Demetrio, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Phil Kavanagh, Mikkel Stormir, Samuel André, Francis Fort, Tiago Nunes, Fergal Cossen, Hal Herzog, Nuno Machado, Jonathan Librant, João Linhares, Stantanti, Samuel Correia, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, João Eira, Tom Hummel, Sardas France, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila DEZA-ARAUJO, Romain Roach, Diego Londonho Correia, Yannick Punter, Adana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavlo Stasevski, Nelek Bach, Guy Madison, Gary G. Alman, Sam Afzal, Adrian Yeager, Paul Tolentino, João Barbosa, Julian Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Douglas Fry, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Ponce Cortez, Ursula Litsky, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, Sonny Smith, John Wiseman, Daniel Friedman, William Buckner, Paul George Arnaud, Luke Lowacki, Georgios Theophanes, Chris Williamson, Peter Wolozin, David Williams, Diogo Costa, Anton Erickson, Charles Murray, Alex Shaw, Maury Martinez, Coralie Chevalier, Bangalore Atheists, Larry Dealey Jr., Old Erringbone, Sterry, Michael Bailey, Dan Sperber, Robert Grassi, Igor N., Jeff McMahon, Jake Zool, Barnabas Radix, Mark Campbell, Thomas Dovner, Luke Nissen, Chris Story, Kimberly Johnson, Benjamin Galbert, Jessica Nowicki, Linda Brandon, Nicholas Carlson, Ismail Benzliman, George Coriatis, Valentin Steinman, Per Crowley, Kate Van Goller, Alexander Hubbard, Liam Dunaway, BR, Masood Ali Mohammadi, Perpendicular, Jonas Hertner, Ursula Goodenough, Gregory Hastings, David Pinsoff, Sean Nelson, Mike Lavigne, and Dios Necht. A special thanks to my producers: Isar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Tom Vanagdam, Bernard Ugnik, Curtis Dixon, Benedict Mueller, Thomas Trumbull, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, Giancarlo Montenegro, Alnick Ortiz, and Nick Golden, and to my executive producers Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, Bogdan Kanivets, and Rosie. Thank you for all.